acoustic guitar and plays Wonderwall.
Wow.
Like
Or anything by Ed Sheeran.
oof. If he picks up if he comes to the party with an acoustic guitar and he plays John Mayer, don't trust him.
Yeah.
Don't trust him. Your body's not a wonderland. Crime scene dealing with that guy. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams to other channels and adding new shows. Speaking of shows, this past Saturday, we had a great one with C. Derek Varn of Varn Vlog, where we discussed the idea that there is a resurgence of organized labor. I'm sure MT is putting links in the description as we speak, putting links in the chat. We also opened up the phone lines on the Saturday show. There was a really cool, I don't want to say debate, but conversation around what Derek was talking about with another labor organizer in a different state. It was a great call. It was a great show. I think we went about 3 hours on that one. So it's something we'd like to do more. MT has mentioned, also Minjin Bajlan has mentioned they'd like to see more phone calls on Saturdays. But as many of you know, those phone lines ain't free. That said, if you enjoy what we do here in TIR and don't want to make the yearly or monthly commitment to show your support with revolutionary merch.
Woo!
I think the faceless, Jesus, I'm trying to read so fast. The faceless voice of reason, the mass precarious producer, M. Tucson, can explain this even more. Please welcome M. Tucson.
Hello. So good to be with you again. So good to talk to you about what to wear when it's brick outside.
Brick?
Do you know what brick means?
Drugs?
Brick is cold.
Oh, because where I'm from, it means drugs.
Okay. It also means drugs where I'm from, but when someone says it's brick outside, that means it's cold.
I would assume if someone said it's brick outside, someone has drugs in large quantities. I told you this story about the first time I ever saw. I told you the first time I ever saw a drug bust, I was like 9-10 years old. And they were pulling out bricks out of my friend's sister's boyfriend's car. The unmarked went up behind him, so they started pulling bricks out.
Wow.
I was like, and it looked like real little bricks. The package don't need.
Do you know what TIR merch is not? It is not bricks. It's
not drug related.
We don't have bricks for you.
We don't.
We have hoodies. We have pullovers. We have snapbacks.
Can you show the people?
Can I show the people? Can I?
You can do multiple things because you. Oh my goodness! Look at that.
All things are possible with
The
TIR.
anti-capitalist TIR logo.
In 3 different colorways.
And the WuTang one. I love the WuTang one.
Yes. Got you some snapbacks. Got mouse pads.
Mugs.
Shut up. Not 1 mug, but 2.
2 mugs.
2 mugs.
Two mugs.
Those mugs.
Classic Anglo pessimism.
Classic.
Someone in the chat is saying about the rebranding of homelessness to unhoused. When I was in West Oakland, the encampment, the woman that we would call like the mayor of the encampment said, "We're not homeless, we're curb adjacent."
Hey.
We're curb adjacent over here. Hey.
Adjacent. What are you talking about?
True story. I wish I could make that up. True story.
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
Okay. Well, we're also getting ready for Valentine's Day on this revolution, and we are taking your relationship questions anonymously.
And on that note,
if you want to, you can just submit stuff about Jason's love life. That's good too. Well, we're gonna get into it. Send us your relationship questions. We will have them answered by qualified adults, or at least qualified minors.
Jesus Christ.
Either way, they'll be qualified. How? I don't know.
Like have Phoenix answer your questions?
Yeah. Aw.
Qualified minor. Every answer will be, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Someone has a question already. It says, what amount of farting is acceptable during the first date? Don't ask me that question.
Hey.
I'm a first date farter. I can't trust a woman that doesn't break wind.
I do. What is this, Love Line? Yes, it is. It's Lefty Love Line. And you're going to love it.
Let's ask another person, first date farter. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He's my homie, my dog. I wish you guys could see his face in the virtual green room, because when I said that, he looked like he was ready to jump through the screen. I've never farted on a first date.
How dare you?
They call me Mr. Robert. Please welcome the city Poitiers at the left, Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Peace and greetings, M. Tucson, the Sydney Poitier of the left. That's interesting. Wow.
I mean, you're a classy dude, is what I'm saying.
You got the starchy shirts.
I like Sydney Poitier, actually.
I know we did a whole show about your love for Sydney Poitier.
Mm-hmm. Just cause.
Someone says Pascal does not fart like my mom.
Like my mom.
At least not publicly.
Putting your mom on blast, so to speak.
I would love that's actually a good question. People fart on the first date.
Someone should actually enter it in. When you click the link, you can actually ask that question and we'll answer it.
What link did you put up in the thing?
We've got a question box, an anonymous question box.
Is that what I got an email for, the question box?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me that?
I did.
When did I listen?
Yeah, when you were just eating tacos.
Look, there's different ways to talk to me. And if you're gonna have something come into the inbox, you have to stop me and physically look at me and make sure I'm paying attention.
That's what she said.
Wow.
She did, and that's why we're divorced.
Oh.
I don't listen. Difficult. Maybe I need to call in with some.
I'm about to
Why
say,
won't she call back?
is this show going to be dedicated to Jason, and he's going to be asking all the questions? Love
What'd you say?
Are you going to be the ones asking all the questions about?
I'll be asking all the questions that are all going to revolve around why won't she call me back?
Why won't she call me? No, we're not going to let you be one of Lichtenstein's sobbing blonde. Why won't Brad call? We're not going to do that. We're going to squeeze you out with other people's problems.
I've made a picture of her with AI art.
God. This is a new cool thing to do.
Apparently it's not, because it's not calling me back. Maybe because the things I put in, she didn't like. But her loss.
Yeah. Let's go with that.
For sure.
But moving on to our actual serious topic. More often than not, when housing is discussed in left circles, the answer for the homelessness problem is simple. Just put them in a house or a room or wherever. I've heard ad nauseum the statement that there are more houses than homeless people. It's just that simple, right? But no one ever says where all this vacant property is and who owns it and how it's going to work. And is housing the only answer? Is the job done once someone gets into a home? What other resources would be needed? Who is going to provide these? The cost to battle homelessness in California alone is in the billions, and yet we still see people sleeping on the streets. Who's failing the unhoused? A recent article in the San Francisco Chronicle detailed how difficult it can be just to get a shelter bed in a post-shelter-in-place SF. From the article, as San Francisco faces a homeless crisis, and pressure from all sides to get thousands of people off the streets, unhoused people and shelter service providers say there is no simple way for them to get themselves into shelter anymore. When the pandemic hit, the city let people stay in shelter beds longer than 90 days to limit exposure. Officials eliminated the system that allowed unhoused people to put themselves on a wait list and instead opted for centralized placements that allowed different agencies to dole out beds, ideally to the most vulnerable. There's been some positive change over the past 3 years. The city ramped up outreach in the Tenderloin in particular and increased the shelter bed count, leading to a 15% drop in the number of unsheltered homeless people, which includes those sleeping on the streets. But there are still not enough spots, and the city has closed pandemic shelters, offering private hotel rooms far more appealing than group shelters. Critics say getting into scarce beds is now less accessible, and the new system leaves the process more to chance and connections. They completely took away the fair process of getting a bed for a night, said Del Seymour, founder of the nonprofit Code Tenderloin, who also sits on the city's homelessness coordinating board. There's no orderly way that I can tell an unhoused person to get into the shelter system. To discuss this further, we have friend of show and director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic. Please welcome Randy Shaw.
Welcome.
Randy, thank you for joining us. So here's my first question to you, Randy. You've been in SF for about 40 years now doing this kind of work?
A little over 40, yeah.
Has it gotten easier? Does it really matter if you have a progressive mayor or city council? I know there was an issue recently that we discussed here on this show about one of the progressive members of the city council having a hard time getting a building built by a Nordstrom's parking lot.
I would say the big picture, and the big picture I'll start with is that I think there's more misinformation and confusion about the homeless crisis now than there's ever been. Unfortunately, instead of people being more informed and understanding, they're less informed because they don't understand why a problem has continued for over 40 years without improvement. Actually, it's gotten worse. And they look at the money that's spent and they say, well, how come we haven't accomplished more? Would that be a correct assessment of how you think people also feel?
We say that again. I didn't hear you.
That, people are looking at, wait, we've had homelessness for 40 years. We spent billions of dollars. Why is the problem even worse after we spent all this money? And that's sort of the core thing you hear about
Yeah.
homelessness.
Yeah.
And the problem, and I've written about it 100 times, said it 100 times, but it just doesn't sink in, is that most money that's spent on homelessness in a budget in California
Mm.
is spent on housed people as rent subsidies. But
Mm.
instead of putting that money in what's called an affordable housing budget,
Mm-hmm.
we call it the homeless budget. So people always say, well, wait, they take them in San Francisco, they take the amount of the homeless budget, divide it by the number of unhoused people, and
Mhm.
say, well, gee, that adds up to X dollars per person. That's crazy that we can't do it. But they forget that, like, every person that 10-to-1 housing clinic houses, the 2,000 people we house,
Mhm.
are all out of the homeless budget. They could have lived in their place for 20 years, but the money that subsidizes their rent comes out of the homeless budget. So the big picture is that America and the federal government has never provided the money necessary to end homelessness. We were on the cusp of doing so with the Build Back Better plan, but Senator Manchin, the Democrat we needed to do, wouldn't vote for the housing part. So the housing part, the big housing gain was excluded from the bill. So we've never spent the money in the United States to end homelessness. So it's gotten worse.
Pascal, you look like you want to follow up with something.
Yeah, what exactly are the factors that are causing it to get worse? In other words, how does the actual increase of homeless bodies in the streets correlate to the condition of the political economy in America? In other words, what is it about the nature of our economic structure as a society that's causing this increased proliferation of homelessness? Is it simply the cost of living, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, the main reason is the gap between what millions of people can afford to pay in rent and the available rental units is it can't be bridged. So if you can't afford rent, if you don't have an income that allows you to afford rent, you're homeless. And until the 1980s, if you were on Social Security disability or SSI or SSD, you could have no problem getting housing in San Francisco. By the mid 90s, you couldn't get housing. The rents had gone up in the SROs beyond the grant level. And that's true so we have millions of people. Many of them aren't homeless, but they're living in overcrowded units because they can't afford to have a place. We just ended up getting America under Ronald Reagan, starting with Richard Nixon and then Reagan. Nixon took us out of the public housing business, which is the most cost-effective way to house low-income people is through public housing. We got out of that business. And then Reagan took us out of the subsidized rent business. He slashed the HUD subsidies. We've never recovered. But people wonder, well, that's ancient history. That's 40 years ago. Yeah, but we never got the money back. And meanwhile, as everyone knows, gentrification in major cities occurred everywhere. Rents went higher and higher, but the income disparity grew. So it used to be that 75% of eligible families for eligible federal assistance would get it. Now it's under 25%. So what happens to the rest of those families? They're in shelters or doubling up with relatives.
And we should probably add, and Pascal, you can probably get into this even deeper. There was a lot of failures in public housing during the 60s and into the 70s. So, there was kind of a public cry to fix these problems. So it wasn't like everybody was happy living in tenement housing in Pruitt-Igoe.
Well, you should see the documentary on Pruitt-Igoe. It may give you a different impression. The reality is that the government defunded public housing, made it impossible conditions, and used that as to justify under Bill Clinton to destroy public housing. So this isn't like some conspiracy theory. It's an undisputed fact that the United States did not adequately fund public housing. Conditions ran down as a result. And then people decided, well, the conditions are so bad, we should just demolish it because it's too expensive to repair. But that primarily has affected the public housing issue primarily affects family homelessness. Most of the complaints you get publicly, most of what you talk about are single adults, and they have a separate issue.
Mm-hmm. And what issue would that be?
Well, the inability to afford rent. And, in the last couple of years, there's been a big push because they noticed that the nature, the description of the typical unhoused person has changed. When I started housing homeless people through the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, it was mostly overwhelmingly people who just, lost their job in a warehouse and looking for work, and they ended up getting work. There was a very temporary thing. Now we have people who have often serious substance abuse problems. And, there's a lot of debate about, well, is housing alone enough because people have substance abuse problems? But there's a lot of people who maintain their housing with substance abuse problems. Obviously, we have to deal with those problems. And there's always going to be people who can't be housed because of their addiction. But people could afford rent. We wouldn't have a homeless problem in this country.
So, Tucson, you sound like you want to say something.
I mean, it's just, you cleared my sinuses, man. They're just, okay. Why don't people know when they're looking for someone to blame? Why don't they know to blame Joe Manchin? Why don't they know to blame higher levels of government?
That is a great question. I'll give you the answer. Because when you read about homelessness in Los Angeles, all the articles, Karen Bass or San Francisco, all the mayors of New York, Eric Adams, the articles never mention the Republicans. Not one Republican senator would support the Build Back Better housing bill. We've never had Republican support for housing since 2002. For the last 20 years, they're automatic no on anything funding housing. But that isn't in the story. It's about New York City and how they do their resources. It's about people in LA and why aren't they being more efficient using their funds. It's a brilliant strategy that the National Republican Party has done. Get everyone to blame Democratic mayors of big cities. The articles rarely give the real cause.
And, we were speaking before the Christmas break about an article that had come out blaming the San Francisco, what's it called? The HH, I forget what it's called in San Francisco.
Oh, the lawsuit on the shelter.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, a few years ago, there was a Ninth Circuit court ruling that said that logically that you can't arrest someone for camping when you haven't offered them shelter or housing. Obviously, you're arresting them for their status. So cities have always tried to say, okay, well, we're going to offer you shelter, and those if you turn it down and you want to keep camping, we can arrest you. San Francisco's had barely any arrests on this, but a lawsuit was filed claiming that San Francisco was not offering shelter. And I know the people in charge, and I know they were offering shelter. They submitted a declaration. The judge issued a ruling against San Francisco that said people camping in public areas have the right to camp and have the right to turn down shelter and housing, which is just a nut decision that makes no sense. It's being appealed, but I think that it shows this idea that it implies that everyone out on the streets wants shelter. Many do not want shelter for various reasons, drugs, the rules, dogs. But it just shows you how confused people are about what the problems are and how to solve them. Camping is not a solution to homelessness.
Wow. That's a very, people get mad at me when I say things like that. Like, I don't think anyone really wants to live in a tent. I remember once.
There's no bathroom.
If you're in the city, hell, if you're in Oakland now in 2023, good luck finding a public restroom. The parks don't even have them. I remember seeing a dude. I was coming off of where 24 hits 80 because I lived in West Oakland, so taking West Street. And this is before they did all those encampment clearings. This is probably like 8 years ago. And as I was coming off, when they had the big encampments under the freeway over there, a gust of wind blew and the tent flew up, and there was a dude holding a baby in the tent. And I just flashed back to being a 21-year-old dad holding my daughter who had colic, and she's crying uncontrollably. I'm crying because I can't stop her crying uncontrollably, and thinking how difficult that was for me with the roof over my head, and seeing this quick image of this man holding this baby under a tent And I was like, that's no way for anyone to live.
I just saw a comment from Matt L. about the judge in LA, and that raises an issue that's really important, is that voters have approved, and in this case, a judge ordered, billion-dollar bond issues and things to fund homelessness. And then they get upset because of how much it costs to build housing or to lease a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cheap. And people sort of LA had a ballot measure I described in my book, Generation Priced Out, called Prop HHH, which committed to house 10,000 homeless people. Well, LA has 60,000 homeless people, and the 10,000 would be 15%, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd see this huge backlash because people started to realize that Prop HHH wasn't solving homelessness. Well, no one ever said it was. It only was the pledge to do 10,000, and then due to what happened post ballot measure, where construction costs went up, it only ended up doing 7,000. But people then feel like, well, there's no point. Money isn't the problem because we passed that bill. Well, wait a minute. It only was going to do 15% of the homeless population. You know what I'm saying? There's just the public has extremely unrealistic expectations of the cost. And when they hear that it's a high number, they get all upset, not realizing it's lifetime rent subsidies. You can't just house people for a month. It's a permanent rent subsidy that costs money.
And it doesn't even take into account services that people may need when they're housed, because we're always, as you've said before on this show, you don't just get to pick who goes in the house randomly. You got to take the most vulnerable person. So if you haven't been able to live anywhere for whatever reason, you're first to go.
And it's also true. Talk to anyone in homeless services, and they'll tell you the population is far more in need, far more substance abuse now than 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we noticed from our hotels completely different. Also the average age of the people in our hotels is 58. These are people often who've been on these aren't job ready young 20-somethings who had a tough break. These are people who had a tough life, had a lot of hard health impacts. They're not well, and now it's up to someone to try to house them and keep them housed.
And that's the struggle. And it's not just, oh, you're using drugs in a place that's not a wet facility. There's tons of wet facilities. It's like, do we have the manpower to help you stay housed? And I feel like there's so many people, because they don't get their hands dirty and truly work here. Maybe they volunteer, they protested, but making it your job, not a lot of people want to do that.
Well, also, every job a 10-to-1 housing clinic has is an in-person job. We're in an era now, like in San Francisco, we have entire state and federal government that people don't come to work, they work at home. So a lot of people, so you're asking people to come into work. And we had our people at work during COVID before there was a vaccine.
Yep.
So, that's why, you see things on Twitter about a nonprofit homeless industrial complex and all this stuff. And what's happened is the frustration the public often feels toward the failure to federally fund the solution ends up, let's blame the people working on it. This nonprofit is corrupt. This nonprofit didn't do a good job. This mayor didn't do it the way we think they should have done it. And it's really very common now. And so, to blame the people who are actually working to solve the problem, because the real villains are in Washington and you don't see them.
Pascal?
Yeah, Randy, I wanted to ask you, how much did the municipal pro-growth agenda of the urban regimes of the 80s and 90s help to facilitate the crisis in homelessness?
Well, urban gentrification, what happened in a nutshell is in the late 1970s, when urban gentrification began across America, the demand for rent subsidies, because you take the SSI recipient, who suddenly needed a rent subsidy. Then the Reagan administration decimates the HUD budget in 1981. So just when rent subsidies needed to expand, the federal government reduced them. So gentrification could have not caused homelessness had it been accompanied by a massive increase in rent subsidies, but since it wasn't, it facilitated it dramatically, and that's true to this day.
So it was a particular policy decision on the part of the conservatives who took in power during that period of heightened neoliberalism, where they cut federal subsidies for public housing that helped that pro-growth agenda to really facilitate an increase in the homeless population.
Exactly. And I'll give you an example. Like under Obama, his one big thing he did for homelessness was on veterans homelessness, he created a voucher program called VASH. If you're a veteran in San Francisco, you can get an apartment now with a voucher. We have hotels that we leased started in 2016 that have all these vacancies because veterans can get apartments. They don't need SROs. Well, if we expanded that voucher program, as would have happened under Build Back Better, we'd be having a whole different discussion about homelessness. We'd still have a homeless problem, but it'd be much less, but money didn't come.
Well, let me ask you this question about the hotels, Randy. When we first talked about the hotels, I think you looked at it as kind of maybe a future solution. We have these properties that we can take over single room occupancy. When Randy says SRO, that's what it is, a single room occupancy, with the bathroom, which is great, right? But what do these hotels look like now? I mean, I know the one I was at in East Oakland got turned over back to the original owner and is a commercial building again. So what's happened to most of these hotels in the Bay Area? I know you could talk about San Francisco. Maybe you can't speak to Oakland.
Well, what happened, you mean the SIP program was a temporary program the federal government was funding. So we housed all these people, but then the money ran out. I mean, it's all money. And like right now, San Francisco, which we thought had a lot of money to solve homelessness because of a ballot measure that passed called Prop C, turns out all the Prop C money has been used. So, I mean, it could come back, but the Prop C money was tied to taxing employees who worked in the city, and there's fewer employees in the city. So one thing, Pascal, is that the urban gentrification trend did produce a lot of wealth in cities that could be used to fund programs for homeless. The departure of those employees have made it harder for cities like San Francisco, but it just becomes the construction cost to build housing for the unhoused is extremely expensive, and people think you can't do it for under $500,000 a unit, and that's cheapest. So, when you start adding up the numbers, $1 billion sounds like a lot. When you start adding it up with the 60,000 homeless people in LA, $1 billion doesn't go that far.
And Randy, I want to kind of amplify that point you just said. $500,000 per unit, not building, unit is the cheapest.
And many of them go $750,000 or $750,000 a unit. Many of their projects.
Unit.
Yes.
Again, I want to amplify. Sorry, Tucson. I just want to amplify this point again. You're also talking about a population that isn't going to be part of the workforce.
Right. For the most part. That was very different than when Tenderloin Housing was going to start doing homeless programs. I used to interview every person, and so many of them, we had a program where people were getting jobs programs, and so many of our people got jobs so quickly after they got housed that I was disappointed that they weren't staying in the SRO because I wanted to bring working people back to the hotel. As soon as they got a job, they moved to an apartment. Yeah. Now, and we used to hire a lot of people from our staff. There's still some people in that category, but the vast majority are not. They're not employable. They're not looking for work. They're really trying to. Half our people get an SSI eventually because they're disabled.
So the prices that you mentioned before, is that housing from scratch?
To build it. If people say we ought to build housing for the homeless, well, if you have a 70-unit building, it's going to be $50 million, and that doesn't count that's just construction, not the ongoing services management. So it's really difficult for local governments to pick up that entire cost. But the voters expect local mayors and supervisors and council members to get it done. They don't want to hear excuses. They don't want to hear people like me saying, You got to get the money in federally because that's where it's always been. They don't want to hear that in the local mayor's election. They want to hear that you can solve it as mayor. What are you going to do as mayor to solve the problem? So we're kind of operating on a deep delusion.
It's a federal problem that looks local.
Right. That takes the effect local. And even at the state, Gavin Newsom has given more money than any prior governor of California, but Jerry Brown was governor for 8 years, never spent $1 on affordable housing, even though the state was flush with cash, and the media didn't criticize him for it. I criticized him, but no one in the major newspapers did. Here we have a governor of California during a big boom period, not spending any money on affordable housing. And he gets away with it politically.
Well, I guess that story is not sexy. We do have a super chat here. Thank you, Virtuoso, for the super chat. I was in Berkeley, California, and saw homeless encampments along a street called Martin Luther King Jr. Way. At the time, I thought it was ironic. Yes, there is homeless encampments.
Well, Berkeley's done a lot better than other cities, and it's also true that a number, we end up, people be critical in Berkeley or Oakland or LA or San Francisco, but then we have all these cities that really make no effort to house their unhoused population and pretty much use their police to push them to those cities that have services. Mm-hmm. So a lot of cities in California have gotten away with providing no services.
Would you say those cities are kind of more bougie cities, nicer cities?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Santa Barbara.
There's been a recent controversy about the housing element in California because the governor is making places like Atherton build apartments, and they don't want to build apartments, but they're taking a hard line. We'll see what happens when there's all around the state these affluent communities that try to avoid their responsibilities.
Atherton is a very rich suburb outside of San Jose, for those that don't
know. Jason gave us a bit of reading to do. So in one of the articles, I believe it was San Francisco, where a library was being converted into housing for the unhoused. That's maybe it is.
I think it's
a SAN.
That was also during all those what they call SIP hotels are done. A person just posted a note about publicly owned housing. There is a bill in the legislature to create social housing in California, which is really where we need to go. We should have never gotten out of the public housing business. Richard Nixon got us out, and then Democrats didn't argue because they have all the problems they were hearing from their constituents. But the cheapest way to end the homeless problem is build more public housing. And so this social housing is a strategy that Alex Lee is sponsoring from San Jose, and hopefully it'll pass. It's an uphill battle because when you actually get in the legislature, people start thinking, do we really want the government to build housing? Government's not good at doing anything, right? And that's what you hear.
What do you mean by social housing?
Well, it's based on the European model like they have in Austria, where they have in the same building affluent tenants, market rate tenants, and low income tenants, and they use the rents from the affluent tenants to help subsidize the low income tenants instead of the government subsidizing it. It can't really happen without any government assistance, but it means it's a great idea because you mix income groups in the same building and help cross subsidizing. That's how Austria and much of Europe, Copenhagen, that's how they do their housing.
Isn't there a new unit over there by the new Warriors Stadium like that, Randy? I know they had like a lottery or something. There was like 1 or 2 units that they were going to be low income.
That's the BMR units where they have below market rent units and inclusionary units. This would be the whole project. It would be built by the government. The state of California would create an entity to build housing, and it has to be cheaper than doing it any other way, really, ultimately. But the public has such horror stories about the public housing, Pruitt Ego, and all the stuff you talked about, Cabrini Green, that it's politically it's going to be a tough row.
Pascal, do you want to say something? You look mad.
No, I'm not mad. Why do you always ask? The question I want to ask you, Randy, is that based on the articles that we had to read for this program, there are certain cities in California, particularly I believe San Francisco, that are seeing fluctuations in terms of the numbers of the unhoused or the homeless. Some are actually seeing some decrease, while cities like San Diego are seeing an increase. How do you explain the different actual numberings of housing of unhoused in those different cities? And is this a consequence of certain policies that are being taken, or just simply the geographical realities of where those cities are?
Well, you raise a very big point that people don't like to talk about, which is that San Francisco gets criticized for, like, wait, you spent all this money and you have the same size homeless population. Hey, but the city housed a record number of people in the last 2 years. They've added more permanent housing than they'd ever added, but new people keep becoming homeless. And in our society, when housing costs remain high, and if people can't get help in the city they're living in, they come to the cities that offer them help. LA is an interesting example because the whole mayor's race that just happened was all about homelessness, was like the issue.
Yeah.
Karen Bass's entire mayoralty in LA is based on whether she can get the homelessness under control.
And people feel she's going to be Garcetti 2.0.
Well, it's interesting because Garcetti started off great, and then he just ran out of steam. I think he was beaten down by the opponents, because it's very easy to be negative about problems. It's very easy to say, this program, you can always find this problem that didn't work out here, or this thing went over budget, or that thing had a corrupt person, and so it's frustrating. She's starting off with a lot of momentum, but how's LA going to afford to do 60,000 people?
Well, they're also running into the problem of, that leak causing some people not to show up to see. We talked about this on the show. I think Kevin De Leon, his district is District 14, I think it is, which is where downtown is. So he has the Cecil Hotel, which the Cecil's like, we lost all this money being a private thing and trying to get public funds. Let's just go all the way with it and just get public funds. And they can't fill it. It's like a quarter full.
Raise an issue. I'll tell you something, Jason. We have the same problem in San Francisco. People might be surprised to learn there's hundreds of vacancies in our permanent supportive housing system because of inefficiencies in service, in delivery. It's crazy. The Cecil is 2/3 vacant. They just had a big story about it. And so, but see, the problem is, even if people will focus on that, as they should. I mean, there is legitimate problems with how cities are operating homeless programs. Don't get me wrong. But even if we did everything perfectly, we wouldn't have the money. And that's where it gets to be difficult, because we end up focusing on the wrong targets. We don't get beyond the Hotel Cecil to say, where's the money going to come from? Now, they're trying to do stuff through administration, because the Republican House is not going to support housing money, but they're trying to do some stuff. But what other it's like our healthcare system. We're still cobbling that together after all these years. America is incapable of solving its major social problems because we don't spend the money on it.
Is it because we don't spend the money on it, or because we like the way it is?
What's interesting? A lot of wealthy people, I don't think Republicans like seeing homeless people on the street. I don't think when they go to the theater, they like to see that. But they tend to either blame the local Democratic mayor or blame the people for choosing to be homeless, right? I mean, for decades, I used to have to explain why people haven't chosen to live in a tent.
Yeah.
That was not it wasn't like, wait, suddenly in the 1980s, everyone decided to live in a tent. No, but people believe that. My first book, The Activist Handbook, I did a whole thing about how just having to disprove that point, that people just didn't wake up suddenly in the 1980s and decide they want to live in a tent. But people believe that. They call it the residue of the counterculture.
Oof.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question, Randy, that's really kind of it's a kind of macro political question. There's always this perception about California that conservative use this kind of culture war politics, that California is particularly San Francisco, is some kind of left-wing, ungovernable mess, and that everything that is wrong with left governance is demonstrated in California, in San Francisco, in the Bay, and so on and so forth. And what I find particularly frustrating about those narratives is that they act as if somehow capitalism doesn't exist in California and that the forces of capital don't exist in those cities. Can you explain to me why that narrative is so persistent and how we can actually fight to counteract that narrative?
Well, if there's anyone listening on the show who thinks Gavin Newsom's on the left, you haven't been following his career. I don't think anyone on this show could possibly believe that. When I look at these governors who in the big states, we haven't. Jerry Brown was terrible, and he was against rent control. He was against inclusionary housing. So, when has California had a left governor? I don't know. I don't think. I think it was James Rolfe in the 30s, but I don't think we've had a left governor. I'll tell you what's worth looking at, Pascal, is someone who I think is very progressive, Tina Kotek, the new governor of Oregon. Okay. Let's look at what she does, because I would consider her the most progressive governor in America. And let's see what she does. She was great on getting rent control for Oregon, a great housing person. Let's see what she does. But, the rest of these governors, they're no leftists.
But how would you suggest that we counteract this persistent allegation presented by the right that California and its various municipalities are examples of left political failure?
Well, actually, in a lot of ways, California is an example of left political success because the labor movement has been incredibly successful at getting wages raised, working conditions improved, collective bargaining rules changed for the positive. So I think, I think if you want to look at the positive, organized labor has done a great job for promoting left ideals in California. But the governor that runs the state, and he signs a lot of these bills, but he's I guess compared to Ron DeSantis, he's on the left. But
I mean, does San Francisco still have the thing where people that work in the food service industry get health care? That's done.
I'm not sure, but we have you can work the smallest number of hours to qualify for health care of it, probably anywhere. You get lifetime health care after a certain amount. I mean, we have great benefits, but the reality is that, states like New York, which are often paired, they have not had a progressive governor. I can't even remember the last time. I mean, their current Democratic governor is terrible. So, just terrible. So, it's hard to find progressive governors around the country.
Before we go, I do want to speak about New York real quick because there's something we talk about on this show quite often, and that's the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, who actually ran on a Democrat that ran on a somewhat conservative, as Tucson and I joked before the show, fascist adjacent ticket. And he's proposing a law where he wants to find mentally ill, unhoused people and put them where, I don't remember. Was it hospital, Tucson, or was it?
I thought it was hospitals.
Hospitals.
Away. Let's put them away.
Just away.
Away.
That's really what it is.
And I know you've had to. That was a pretty big national story, and I'm sure it came across your news feed as well. What is your take on that? And is there a way to even approach that mainly?
One thing that I think is very interesting about Eric Adams, he was elected due to overwhelmingly support from Blacks and Latinos. I mean, this is the thing where there's often a disconnect between the left and the working class Black and Latino community, because they went big for Eric Adams, and his deficiencies were well known in that campaign. I think there's a lot of support for that plan that he comes out. I think people around the country are really alarmed by the disoriented, mentally ill people they see roaming, and I think the ACLU position of, well, keep them on the street is a minority. So I think you're going to see other cities adopting it. But what happens, Jason and Pascal, is that the number of people actually ever, apprehended in these things tend to be really tiny. San Francisco had a big controversy about a conservatorship law, finally passed. At the end of the first year, one person had been helped. What people see in a lot of San Francisco, though, when people see real and the subway incidents in New York where a disoriented person pushed someone and killed them in a subway,
Yeah.
freaks people out. But I would say the big picture that people can walk away from this is keep pushing for more housing money and don't think that the short-term solutions of temporary shelters and those aren't solutions.
Mm.
We have to invest in long-term solutions to homelessness. And it's great that Karen Bass closes an encampment in Venice and gives people a hotel room for a short time, but at some point, where are they going to go, those people? You got to have a place for them.
I mean, they just try to do that in People's Park. I don't know if you followed the People's Park situation. A good friend of mine was working on that project to house people, and I asked her, and I'll say it again on this show. I want to keep saying it so people understand my frustration. I said, Annie, I don't say her name. I said, what do you, I said, what do you need? What can I mention on the show? What do you need? And she goes, people. We don't have any people here to work.
Well, you make a great point, and we until we got our salary significantly raised across the board this last budget, as I said, when people look for jobs now in the Bay Area, particularly, there's a lot of stay-at-home jobs, and they'd rather take those jobs. And so, to get people in the human services, they have to be very dedicated. So that's why it's not helpful when people are constantly criticizing the nonprofit sector when these folks are doing the best they can under difficult circumstances, like your friend. By the way, to show you how crazy things are, that just I have to mention this if you have 1 minute, which is that there's a lawsuit to stop housing at People's Park, and the legal theory is that students there's housing for the unhoused, and there's also student housing on the site, 2 different buildings. The legal argument is that students create noise, and they think that's an environmental impact that UC Berkeley failed to assess. One of the court appeal judges 2 weeks ago in the oral argument said he saw no difference between students making noise and pollution coming from cars. This guy is a court of appeal judge in California. And we wonder why we can't get housing built with these kind of judges. Can you believe that? Students making noise? Or is it pollution?
Students making noise in a very
LA
busy
Times
city.
has an editorial criticizing it today, but I mean, this is the world we live in. These are the people in charge, judges.
Also, before we leave, I want to ask this question to Pascal and Tucson and Randy. Randy, longtime leftist. You know, for those that watch the show that are fans of Adolph Reed. Once Adolph found out that Randy was coming on, he goes, "Oh, Randy Shaw, tell him I said what's up." Just to let you know, Randy goes way back with people that we like on this show. What does that say about the state of the left? Everyone has something to say, usually a slogan around the unhoused, but it seems like people like you, Randy, are left to deal with this on your own, and often definitely understaffed in the sense of there's just not a lot of support.
Well, let me make this one point that I'm glad you brought it and gave me a chance to make, which is that there's always been a part of the left that's anti-institutional, anti-government. They were against the Vietnam War, Watergate. There's just like government is the problem, and government often is the problem. But socialists generally see government as part of the solution, and you want to get the right people in government. And I think around homelessness, we have people who just assume that there's someone on the left, whatever the government's doing, it's wrong. The homeless person's always right. Their account of what happens is correct. The government employee is a liar and is making stuff up. And they kind of become very anti-government, the left. And yet you want to be, you call yourself a socialist, but you're always all you do is criticize government. Well, government is what implements socialism. So there needs to be some thought about that as to what kind of socialism the left wants.
That statement can take us into a whole complicated area about ideological sectarianism, what kind of leftist you are, worldview, because there are whole segments of leftists who are absolutely against the state.
This is true.
So how do they then propose to solve this problem? I mean, Randy brings up an excellent point. Some people just have that kind of almost condescending approach. I think we'll just listen to the people. They know what's right and wrong. It's like, well, nah, I get what you're trying to say to a degree, but have you ever worked with the people and listened to them? Because I remember this one woman came to me. She goes, "These Mexicans is plotting to kill me. They speaking that crazy talk." And I was like, I just think they're talking to each other about where they're going to clean next. I don't think they want to hurt you, man. And she went and she hit somebody.
Wow.
You know, it's yeah. I don't even want to say anymore.
We can have that on another show.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I mean to leave it hanging there, Pascal.
No, it's because listen, there are people who will say that, well, we can have workers' councils self-manage the problems of the state. We don't need to have any kind of hierarchy or professional organization because the state is innately hierarchical and corrupt, and we have to turn the power back to the people and so on and so forth. And I think we all know what type of ideological tendency we're talking about who argues this. And I understand the controversy and the problems of the nation state. The nation state is a coercive mechanism that is hierarchical by nature and is also very much, requires punitive mechanisms to get things effectuated. But at the same time, to assume that individuals divorced from any kind of cooperative state mechanism have the capacity to implement policy on a small scale without any form of hierarchy, I think is kind of unrealistic.
Beautifully said. I'll leave it on that. Thank you for having me.
Randy, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's late for you and you got a busy day ahead of you. Thank you so much, Randy. Randy Shaw, director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic. Randy, take care. Have a very good night. And hopefully I will, next time I come up north, I'm going to make it a point.
Next time you stop by the Tenderloin, you make sure you let me know. We go out and hang out.
Oh, my son would love that. My son would love that.
Bye-bye.
Take care, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Bye, Randy.
This is Randy Shaw. Gotta love Randy Shaw. Please, if you guys get a chance, get his book, Generation Priced Out. Someone asked for the news articles. Tucson, do you think you could post those in the comments a little later? Awesome.
I will absolutely do that.
And if you guys hit a paywalled one, hit me up and maybe I can send it to you unpaywalled.
Jason Paywall Miles.
Jason
sending us
unpaywalling stuff, Miles. Only certain ones. Only certain ones. What'd you guys think of Randy?
Randy Shaw is always great. His knowledge of housing policy is extensive, and he knows the left very well.
He has answers. That's
he has
so
answers.
amazing.
You know what always makes me sad when we do these shows? View numbers are always low.
We have 120 right now.
Oh, that's not. We do better.
Yeah, but this is over 100, and I think that's still pretty good.
You know, we don't do enough drama. Apparently, we need to make it dramaful.
What podcaster would you like to see homeless? Get some gossip going.
Someone is asking Pascal, how's the homeless situation in Miami?
It's not as bad as in California, but it's pretty bad in northern Miami.
I mean, Florida has its own issues.
That's true. But the thing is, Florida is such like a reactionary state. I mean, the cops will just like knock people on their head and just be like, get the hell out of here.
We did get a super chat question, and maybe Jason, you can answer it.
Okay.
What are your thoughts? This is from Ken Cowens. What are your thoughts on the trend in cities to turn vacant offices into housing?
Love it. I love when people can take standing structures and turn it into housing. If it makes sense and it's not done extremely cheap and crappy, then I love it, right? That was a great thing about the hotels. That was a great thing about the Cecil. The Cecil's a hotel that's built around the turn of the century, and it's a fabulous structure. It's been standing strong through all those earthquakes, right? So if you have these office buildings that are like retrofitted, ready to go, proper plumbing, because it's an office building, it's probably got better industrial plumbing, and you need that. Like, you guys have no idea how much you need that. And I'm all for it. Let's push for more. Let's push for more cities taking over hotels to house population, because it's an instant good room. I mean, people really don't like shelters, and Randy's right. These shelters are temporary. Who wants to live with the precarity of trying to find a room? Because some people do work, and you don't have all day to hustle to find a room. So it's I like that strategy, just like I liked the hotel strategy. But as Randy said, it ran out of money. And then I think also people ran out of caring.
Yeah. Well, let me ask, do you feel that conversations about BlackRock buying up trailer homes and all of this kind of thing, do you feel that's something people want to talk about in order to distance themselves from the actual problems?
Yeah, because I don't think people understand how trailer homes work. I mean, the reason why BlackRock is buying up trailer parks, and this has been happening for a while, it's not a new phenomenon. If you think it's a new phenomenon, then you should probably read more financial news. But who's the rich guy from Nebraska? Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett has been preaching the gospel of buying up trailer parks for some time. It's a great investment. It is extremely low maintenance, and you make a mint off the space rent. That's ultimately what you're paying for in a trailer park.
The land they're buying.
They're buying the land.
Under the trailer.
You lease the land, right, to these people for whatever the terms are, and they move their trailer or mobile home on that land, and they pay. Jesus, when I was in real estate finance, it was like $750 for a space for a double wide. And one of the things that people were finding was, because it's so maintenance free, there's open sewage problems everywhere. People literally living next to massive open sewage ditches, and and the disease followed. So it's kind of the new slumlording. And it's not just BlackRock, it's also wannabe land owning millionaires, people that watch like a Tony Robbins video or something like that, okay, I found the secret, now it's buying a trailer park because I can just buy the land and walk away ultimately, and not have to care about it. So trailer parks and the unhoused aren't necessarily one and the same. Now in Oakland, and I can't speak for more cities, they were doing a thing having RV encampments, because there's so many people that were buying older RVs. I don't know if you guys know, RVs don't retain their value. So a used RV is relatively cheap. So in Craigslist in the Bay Area for the last probably like 6 or 7 years or so, RVs are sold as literally mobile homes, right? And we don't have the weather that you guys have in places like New York or Chicago, where your RV should be weatherized for that. We don't get freezes as much, and LA is even better for that. So what they were doing was setting up literal parking lots for RVs, putting bathrooms in them, security guards, but they also went the way of, ended up being kind of horrible little spots that people didn't like to have near them either.
Fascinating.
Misery business.
You said misery business? Like the song?
Like the song.
We ready for some champagne? We ready for some champagne?
Yeah, now we got to play that song as we go into the champagne room. What is it? Paramore. Can you sing that for us, Tucson? Can we karaoke you doing a Misery Business by Paramore?
Even remember the words. I
Don't worry about it. Once you hear Haley, whatever her name is, belting that out, you'll just jump right in.
I'm sure.
This is the only time you're going to hear anybody on this show say Paramore.
Oh, well, we might next month for Valentine's Day.
There's nobody black in Paramore.
Just the word Paramore.
Oh, just the word Paramore. Got it.
Don't forget to send us your questions, your relationship questions that are actually Jason's problems, and you're just gonna resubmit them.
And we have a new feature for the Champagne Room that I previewed with the TIR staff and the young people on the TIR staff. Stefan and Quinn said this is a great idea.
What feature is that? I didn't get the memo.
Oh, you got the memo, Negro Damas. You just wasn't reading it. So there's this DJ that is very popular with you young people in drama. His name is DJ Vlad. And many moons ago,
yeah, I remember that.
He was a regular DJ. And a good friend of mine who was a relatively successful Bay Area rapper was also a buyer at Rasputin's, and he knew Vlad well. I think they still know each other pretty well. This guy's a screenwriter now. Anyway, good friend, like great friend of mine. We all went to school together, another Albany High connection. We did music together. We used to go to Vlad's parties that he used to DJ. And so he had a mailing list back in the day. If you remember, you write your email on a mailing list. I filled out a Vlad mailing list a million trillion years ago, and I still get these emails. And it's the only way I know what hip hop, but other than working at festivals, I guess, younger people listen to. And we were joking about Nia Long. This is more Champagne Room talk, but we'll give it to you for free. I have a bit of a crush on Nia Long. Nia Long can do no wrong.
Apparently, she broke through your racial ambiguity paywall.
I'm about to say, man, she's black. She's black, right? She's black, right?
You said, God damn.
She's black, man.
Yeah, she's black as shit.
He said it like 5 times.
Yeah.
You know that?
They're black as hell. Yeah.
How does that work for you?
It works great.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, chocolatey as shit. The scene in Boys the Hood. Jesus Christ. Anyway. DJ Vlad had something about Nia Long. It was literally about, it was no joke. Pascal said, we're talking about Nia Long, and he goes, Nia Long, he got in some drama with some basketball guy. So the first thing I see in my email box is Nia Long spills the beans on blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow, this is so crazy. And then I started going down the list of the other things that they're talking about. I was like, I have no idea what any of these words even mean. And so I said, would it be a fun feature if we did a news feature where we go down the list of news topics on DJ Vlad's site and try to figure out what is going on?
Somebody handed Young Thug Percocet in court.
Oh my gosh.
Like, they don't even care.
Yep.
They don't even care. Someone says Jason likes dark chocolate if it's the right brand. That is so funny. There's literal truth to that. There is literal truth to that.
We're gonna do a deep dive on Lil Boosty. We're gonna wipe him down.
So in the Champagne Room, I'm going to read the headlines, and I want Pascal to comment on these news headlines because I have no idea who any of these people are. I don't know what an NBA young boy is.
Yo, lucky you.
So this is going to
I'm
be
just learning about the scandals of the Passport Boys.
the Passport Boys.
Oh, you don't know who the Passport Boys are?
Is that a rap group?
Ooh.
No,
You
the
don't know the Passport
Boys.
Boys?
Passport Boys are a movement.
A movement.
Hey.
Passport Boys are men who take their passport. It's basically sex tourism. They go overseas to find women that they claim they're going to marry because the domestic pickings are slim. It's because the women in America are not, quote unquote, docile enough.
Too mouthy.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds gross. But anyway, Passport Boys. They just sound gross.
Boys indeed.
Passport Bros. Excuse me. Passport Bros.
Oh, not better. Not better.
Steve has some tea to spill.
Steve has some tea on Passport Boys.
Mm-hmm.
Is Steve a passport boy?
From what I heard.
Passport Bros.
Steve was like, I'm tired of you uppity Americans. I want a woman that's happy with indoor plumbing.
Steve was like, I'm tired of the left. I moved to Japan and I only watch anime now. I was like, what? He might be a passport bro.
Oh, Steve says he opened the phone lines and he will talk about Passport Bros.
Mm-mm. They wear Hawaiian shirts.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you so much again, Randy Shaw. This was another good show. I just finished my next piece for Sublation. That's how I felt when I got done.
Yeah.
I hella felt like that. Tomorrow night, we're bringing back Pop Life. I'll be speaking with filmmaker Bill Cody, who's had a very interesting life from film, music, and he worked in politics for years. And now he's finally retired back in his native Georgia. We're going to talk about the documentary he made about the Athens scene. So if you guys are familiar with bands like the B-52s and REM, he made a documentary documenting them, but he also worked in LA City Council. If he have some tea to spill, he definitely sent me a message watching this show about what Randy had to say. So it will be a fun episode. Bill's been on the show before when we did a show about music with Conan. So that'll be tomorrow. And are we doing our Left Reckoning news show Thursday?
No, we are talking about the vid.
What vid?
Don't get us demonetized. Not that vid.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
Couldn't remember when that was.
Sorry about that.
Then Saturday, we might have a return of Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
Word?
What?
Yeah. Well, you know, Marcus was at the New York show.
Yes, he was. Marcus was.
Are we talking sports on Saturday?
Talking sports on Saturday. Paul Prescott said he's going to try to come through.
Oh,
as well.
we're talking about the two Negro quarterbacks.
Two Negro quarterbacks, man. Yeah. Someone says, is Jason going to discuss his James Brown phase? I'll discuss it right now. I'm going through my James Brown phase. I will be supporting right-wing candidates for office, and I'll be rocking.
Beat women too?
Beat women? No. Only the mouthy ones.
They'll be white.
They
They will all be white.
will all be white.
R.I.P. Brown.
R.I.P. Jason's Twitter. How mad would people be if they saw me with a white chick and they really believed that I was really like beating the shit out of them?
Oh my God.
Like, oh,
great for the ratings.
People thought I was with Jordan at the live show.
Make sure you hit like, everyone.
Horrible.
Hit like, subscribe, tell a friend.
So the link for the champagne room is already up.
Hmm.
And I can't wait to read these headlines to Pascal and Tucson.
It's gonna be good.
Tucson, we're also going to open up the champagne room with Tucson karaokeing
Oh God.
Misery Business by Paramount.
Coerce karaoke.
Coerced. Yes, someone said, did Jason coerce you into doing that? Sam
Mhm.
Sparrow karaoke? Yes. Yes, I did.
Yes, he did.
This is not just my James Brown phase, it's also my Ike Turner phase. And on that note, we are
Out.